Well, having talked about the theology behind what goes into a formation group, remembering that what we're inviting people into is a deep relationship with the Lord, a deeper relationship into their community and faith, usually in their church, and a deeper participation in God's mission in the world. I want us to also understand a little bit of the philosophy of learning and practice that goes into what happens in a formation group. Now remember, a formation group isn't an experience in spiritual theology, but an experience of spiritual practice. And one of the things that people understand or experience in one of our cohorts is the reality that we're doing very little teaching about the spiritual practices themselves. So let me give you an example of that. When we teach Lectio Divina or engage Lectio Divina, we do no experience or history of Ignatius. We don't do any of the process of how Lectio Divina was used in the church over the last few hundred years. We actually simply just dive in and engage. And not only do we leave out the history, but we leave out the actual structure of explaining what a Lectio Divina process is. We don't talk about the four movements. We just actually just dive in and do it. And one of the things that people have experienced about it is that the first time I lead Lectio Divina, and the second time, and the third time, I will do it differently all three times. And the reason is I don't want anybody to get stuck on the history because their own spiritual tradition or church tradition might create a barrier to the practice because of the history or because of the background from which the practice came. But I don't want the actual structure or form of the practice to become a barrier either. I want people to feel freedom within the practice to engage with the Lord and engage with what the Holy Spirit's doing without asking the question all the time, am I doing it right? If I can engage in the practice and let the Lord take me where I am, I can use this practice in a way that's going to feed and lead my life into relationship with God more than did I get it right? Did I do it right? It's not an opportunity for us to judge ourselves based on how well did I do the practice, but it's an opportunity to just engage with the Lord and experience whatever the Holy Spirit wants to speak to me from the scriptures. One of the things we've experienced is folks with the most training in spiritual theology or experience reading lots of history, spiritual history, have had the hardest time engaging because they might experience something we do in a retreat and go, well, that's not how it's normally done. And those people have this barrier of form and structure to experiencing what Christ is doing. Later in this training, we're going to talk about the varied and adapted nature of spiritual practice. And so we're trying to, at the very beginning, teach in a way that's going to allow people to vary practices in their life and adapt practices to fit who they really are. So the philosophical background is we're doing very little teaching, but inviting people to engage their life deeply in spiritual practices. That's an embodied engagement. We're not people who are separated from our body. We don't have a spiritual life and an embodied life. We have one that's integrated. So we integrate our embodied experience with Christ by engaging our whole being in practices that are going to help us relate to God, to relate to God's people, and engage in God's mission in the world.